Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Scrum Scale webinar presentation. My name is Alyssa Layden, and I am the Product Owner of Marketing for Scrum Scale LLC. Before introducing today's speaker, I'd briefly like to cover just a few housekeeping items. First, to provide the best listening experience, all audio lines except for the host and the presenter will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to ask the presenter a question or add a comment, please use the Q&A panel on your console. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to play on demand from both the Scrum at Scale website and the Scrum at Scale YouTube channel within 24 hours. All right, we are now ready to start today's webinar, and for that, I would like to introduce our host, Luiz Quintela, aka Q. Q will lead a 30-minute presentation and then host a 15-minute Q&A session. All right, take it away, Q.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. I think several of the guys on the call know me. We've been doing a series of webinars focused on product ownership. This is probably number 5 or 6. And in the past, people asked me to talk about impact mapping, which is actually one of my favorite topics. But bear in mind, because of the time, we're not going to cover it with a lot of detail. However, I want to give you guys as much detail as possible, and so you can use the technique for many things. Impact mapping can be used for any project, software or non-software, can be used at team level, can be used at group of teams level, can be used at portfolio level. It's a very flexible technique, and it's based on visualization. So by visualizing a map, a mind map, which is an impact map, you can tell a lot of things like factors, data, ideas, having a shared understanding on what you're trying to accomplish, reveal connections, and all those sorts of things. So visualization, it's very important because your brain processes information 60,000 times faster than text. Most people actually have trouble remembering more than 5 to 7 items, but they can remember thousands of images. We are very image centric. So graphics are a very quick way to broadcast a vast amount of information, and they can be memorized quite easily. So visualization, it's very helpful because visuals are stored in long-term memory. Text is stored in short-term memory. So it's important to always have pictures or images to associate with an idea. You remember things a lot easier, you remember them a lot faster, and you can have a much broader picture when you use visualization. So impact mapping is a technique that basically delivers alignment between strategic business and tactical and operational parts that you do in the product development. It's really good to capture scope, and it's very good at identifying why, who, how, what, who are the things and people involved, what we're trying to accomplish, what is going to be the results. So it's a very easy technique to use, and it's very useful. So impact maps, they are based in 4 things. What goals you have, who are the actors, what are the impacts, and what are the deliverables. So every goal maps to an actor or actors, which maps to an impact or impacts, and it maps to a bunch of deliverables. And those deliverables will eventually lead to a backlog. So ideally, you cannot have backlog items that don't map to a goal. So impact map helps you have traceability from your backlog to what business goal you're trying to accomplish. So in goals, you are not defining a scope. You are providing a problem and not the solution. For instance, open a new library by April. That's a goal. You're not saying how you're going to do it, what's involved, do I have to have building? No, you're just saying that's my goal. decrease transaction time by 500 milliseconds if you're talking about software development. So those are the goals. Now, once you have a goal, you have to identify actors. And there are usually three actors: a primary, for instance, a player on a game; a secondary, which, for instance, the facility teams is somebody who provides a service; and then there's the offstage, which is people who don't necessarily benefit from that directly, but they're involved in it. For instance, senior decision makers. Be specific who the actors are. Please don't say users, because users can be very anything, and that's not very specific. And usually they're defined in individual, persona, role, and group. Usually I take that approach. So those are the people who are going to be involved into that goal or are targeted by that goal. Then obviously you have a goal, you have an actor, what impact you want to achieve. For instance, transactions are executed 3 times faster. So how is that? You show how that behavior would be different than the behavior that you have right now. You should only list an impact, what move you into achieving that goal. And please don't make a list that's 6 miles long, because that's not going to be helpful for anybody. It's also common in the impacts to list actors that can hinder or help. There is always the people who can help you, and there is always the people who create trouble for you. So it's always good to have that in mind when you list impacts. Then, obviously, the deliverables, which is actually the least important part, because you are more concerned in figure out what the goal is, who are the actors, and what are the impacts. But eventually you have to come to the deliverables, if that path is what they want to follow. So bear in mind that deliverables in an impact map, not all of them may be delivered, because they may be overcome by events, they may not have enough value, but the idea is to list the things that meet a certain goal. Don't get into much detail very early, because you can always break things down, and trying to put too many details in the beginning just bloats the map, and you may actually be running into solution mode. I have a sample impact map that actually you find this example very easily on the web. It's a very good idea how to relate things. For instance, your goal is to grow mobile advertising. So who would be the actors in growing that goal? For instance, we have super funds with mobile devices, we have concert organizers, we have artists, agents, and promoters. So those are the actors to achieve your goal. And as you can see, each actor, for instance, the fans with mobile device, impact, come back more frequently. That's the impact you want to cause. Stay longer in the site, view more ads. All those things are into the idea of growing mobile advertising. And then at the very end, once you understand these first 3 things, goal, actor, and impact, you also have the deliverables. For instance, push updates or forums to come back more frequently. Stay longer. Well, create a chat window in your site. View more ads, yeah, better pagination, stick as many ads there as possible so you can actually grow your mobile advertising. Now, impact maps can be used for anything. If you are a Scrum at Scale practitioner or you have any knowledge of Scrum at Scale, you've probably seen an assessment heat map. And it looks pretty much like this one. This came from one of the clients of mine earlier this year. And you see there's things in red. That's usually where the improvement has to happen first. So this heat map tells you a lot of things, but okay, what do I do first and how do I go about, for instance, to do prioritization? I see several columns there. There's the opinion of each person who took the survey to create the heat map. And they say, well, prioritization is a big deal. It's so big that there are some holes there. People didn't even know there was any prioritization. So how do you go from this into an impact map before you even create a backlog? Well, one way to do that is to imagine this. For instance, we had reduced decision delay. That's my goal. Decision delay, if you're not familiar with, it's a very important metric to keep track because a study from the Standish Group from 2018 noted that decisions that take 5 hours or more have only about 18% success rate. And decisions that take about an hour or less will increase that success rate to close to 60%. And we all know that sometimes teams and others, and even individuals, stop and wait for decisions for a long time. So one of the things that we do, either at a team level or scaled level, is to reduce decision delay as much as possible. In Scrum at Scale, we have two big targets. One is decision delay, and the other one is eliminate dark work. And those are actually things that you can use for any scaled framework. But overall, that's two very important things. People who know me know that it's always coming out of my mouth, eliminate dark work and reduce decision delay. Well, that would be one of my goals, reduce decision delay. So who would be the actors on that? Well, the leadership, the Scrum Masters, and the product owner team. So what are the impacts? For leadership, remove impediments. For Scrum Masters, escalate and resolve. For product owner team, pivot or clarify. Remove impediments may have a deliverable called deputize when not available, so somebody can speak by leadership, or create a hotline, a way to ask for help really quick and get an answer very quick. So as you can see, we can use impact maps for several things. It's not necessarily software related, can be for any action that you want to take to achieve a goal. Now, impact maps highlight a lot of things. Once you have a map like this one, you start to see several things. One of them is wrong assumptions. If you build your map and things don't connect quite well, perhaps I made the wrong assumptions. Leadership is not going to do that. Or I also did my prioritization of what I call heroic mode. I think this is more important than that. But then when you put on a map, it doesn't necessarily validate what you thought. Scope creep is very easy to see scope creep on an impact map. Stuff keeps growing and growing and growing, and why is that? Over-engineering is another thing that's very easy to identify. And I usually use this name quite a bit, pet features. You get some features on your backlog and you can't map them to a goal. So why is it in there? Well, because somebody really likes that have the purple buttons in all forms, but that has no value whatsoever, and it doesn't map to a goal. So imagine those are things that the impact map highlight, and they're very important when you have to prioritize, or more properly, order what you want to do and to achieve your goals. How do we use impact maps? Well, I've been using it for many things. Some of the uses, innovation workshops for new products, where we have a goal, and this goal may lead to a new product. I've done that in the past with companies I worked for. We found out that there were product spaces that we didn't think about until we started setting some goals and said, well, there is value in there. Impact map, because it's very visual, is actually great to align stakeholders into, okay, this is what we're going to do next, what's more important, this is how we meet a goal, this is the impacts that we expect, and those are the deliverables to provide for that goal. Identifying scope of work, you can do it for organizational improvement, which I just showed that with the decision delay. Or you can also do, which I do quite a bit, strategic planning. Again, those things have nothing necessarily to do with scale or software in general. They can be used for any industry in any case. Then we had to talk about benefits. Well, the first one is impact map. It's very good to prevent solutioning. People just come with a solution without even mapping that to a goal. I mean, I have a solution, but does that actually map to a goal? Does that actually make sense on a business side? We sometimes get too wrapped up in the technology and forget that maybe nobody actually will buy that product just because it's technologically advanced. It doesn't mean that meets a market need or even a business goal. Another thing impact maps are really good is when you get to the deliverables part, you can also translate that goal, that product vision, into a viable backlog because it's already ordered. You understand what the goals are, who are the actors, what are the impacts and the deliverables, and those deliverables can compose a backlog. It's also a great collaboration tool. I always ask that the impact map be visible to my teams or group of teams so people understand what the goals are and how that backlog they are working on meets that goal. It's very important for a team, and even more so when you have groups of teams, regardless of the framework, to understand what we're working on, what's the importance, what you are trying to achieve with that, which is a business goal or goals. So it gets a lot more transparent that all those stories in your backlog actually relate to a business goal. So people can see what they are trying to accomplish. There is always the thing that I heard from somebody many years ago. During the Apollo program, if you ask the janitor what was his goal or her goal, you would hear to put a man on the moon, because that was the goal that everybody understood. And an impact map, it's very good for development teams, product teams, whatever the team is doing, to understand how that work relates to a goal. And that's also a very good way to question if some items are actually meeting that goal. Two things about the impact map is never aim to implement the whole map because they actually get really big. What you have to implement is the stuff that has the more value. And the second one is through the map, you can find what's the shortest path for getting the goal mapped to an actor, to an impact, and to a deliverable. So try to always find the shortest path. So you deliver value as early as possible, and you deliver outcomes with a minimum of output. We normally have a preoccupation with output when we should have a preoccupation about outcome. You can many times achieve a great outcome, which is the users love what they're seeing, with a smaller output than you otherwise would guess. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, imagine that people have divergent ideas. Well, I think we should do this goal, it should be mapped this way. Another person may say, no, I think it should be done this way. Well, grow the map, create options. Then you analyze if those paths actually make sense and if one of them is going to be shorter than the other. On the other hand, you also have ideas that converge. So what you do, well, prioritize the map. You have multiple ideas, they're converging, make choices, drop some, promote some higher. Think about that. When you need options, you can grow. When you converge, you can prioritize and shrink and get rid of the stuff that's not necessary. So the next thing is begging the question, when you have impact map and backlog, how do they relate? Well, the impact map by itself is work that could be done. You are just sketching ideas. There may or may not be done. The backlog is work to be done and incidentally should map to a goal. Now, the impact map also has this traceability thing, because you can go from a backlog item into a business goal. Remember, you have goals, actors, impacts, and deliverables. And the deliverables break up into backlog items. So you must at any time map a backlog item to a goal. Otherwise, I question if it should be in the backlog. I usually use this graphic to explain how to think about maps, from what to how, and from earlier to later on. So an impact map, it comes very early, and you are talking about goals and impacts. Then when you get to the deliverable part, you're going to create story mapping, right? You have your stories, and then you can map those stories, but they're also all connected to the impact mapping. And then those stories, you're going to refine, you're going to create acceptance criteria, you're going to have examples of use, etc., etc. And that you do before you even develop. So you see, you go from impact map to story map to specification to development. And things have to map always to a goal. You cannot be developing stuff, be it hard, or building stuff, hardware, software, or whatever, without having a relationship to a goal or an impact. So I always say these things. Deliver outcomes. Don't think about requirements. Don't think necessarily about output. Your focus in product ownership is to deliver the best outcome you can. So don't go planning for the next 36 years, because that's probably not going to work. Don't try to do optimal, try to do enough to meet a goal. Experiment a lot. I mean, how many times we fail to actually find a good solution because we don't experiment enough. Every time you make a mistake, learn from it, right? I mean, I think a good example is a very large software company that learned from that Windows 7 and 8 and all that stuff, and came up to Windows 10, which is a much better OS than they actually ever had, because they learned from experiments, right? Try new ideas, try crazy ideas. I mean, as long as you don't recreate the Microsoft Clippy, you should be okay, right? And one thing that people actually normally forget is experiment to see how a feature actually makes the user mad, or means degrades the user experience. Sometimes we put features into a software product, or even into any product, that actually make the user very frustrated. And if we experimented with it before we committed to it, we'll probably have a much better outcome. Again, output and outcome. Think about outcome and not so much about output. So I still have a few minutes left, and I think we can go into questions and answers. And before we go, just a reminder for you guys, every week we have Scrum at Scale coaching sessions. Even though they're technically Scrum at Scale, we answer everything Scrum related, product related, and they're free. We actually have one this Wednesday. They are US based and Europe based. They're all in English, and we also have some in German and Spanish right now. So back to Elisa, and we'll address questions and answers.
All right, hello, and thank you, Q, for that presentation. We have a few questions already, and one I'm excited to start with. Octavian is asking, is impact mapping workshops, are they initiated by POs?
Yes, most of the time. I mean, most of the time, because we're talking about business goals, which doesn't mean it can be always a PO doing that. Mm-hmm. You can have an impact map for process improvement in your software development department. For instance, the goal is we have to have faster builds, right? Which doesn't necessarily fall under the PO until, of course, the PO has to prioritize that. Mm-hmm. But you can do that for anything that you have a goal and you are trying to find the best way to get that goal done, the shortest way, the most valuable way. So most of the time, yes, it's done by the product owners, but it can be done by anybody depending on the situation.
Awesome. What would you say if the team is so busy with so many priorities and so much work that they say they don't have time to do an impact mapping workshop or an exercise like this?
Usually they're so much busy with so much work because they don't have clear goals. That's called overloading. And don't even let me start on the quality implications of overloading a team or group of teams. That's usually near catastrophe levels. A few months ago, I went to a company somewhere on the East Coast because they had the same problem. They have overloading, and they also have a hard time prioritizing, I prefer to call it ordering their backlog. So what I did is I taught them how to do impact mapping the first half a day. Then the second part of the day and the early morning of the following day, I had them create an impact map for their products. And the final half of the second day, I had them map those impact maps that they created to the backlog that already existed and they couldn't get a hold of. I mean, they were completely swamped and having trouble ordering it. So not to my surprise, only, and this is an exact number that I won't forget anytime soon, only 19.3% of the backlog actually mapped to a goal.
Wow.
So basically 80% of the backlog didn't need to be there. And were they surprised? Yeah, absolutely. So when people claim that they don't have time to do something, I usually ask, are you sure your backlog is actually meeting the company vision and goal? I beg to tell you that probably isn't, unless you can do an impact map that proves that it is.
Awesome. Perfect response. All right. I have another one from Paul, and he says, you mentioned previously that the impact map can share your shortest path. Does this mean that the shortest path is an MVP?
Is an end, sorry?
MVP.
It can be an MVP, usually is, or if you don't have the time for MVP, at least should be an MMP, minimum marketable product. But technically, the best way is to be an MVP. I wouldn't skip the MVP because that's a learning vehicle. I know some people who do, and they go straight to minimum product, and usually that doesn't actually achieve the perfect outcome. So yes, that can be an MVP. Should be.
Got it. All right. We have an additional one from Chris. Do you recommend any specific tools, apps, etc. to do this work?
I try to stay away of recommending things in webinars because it gets, if I mention one person and I don't mention the other three, we get a bit of flack. You can do a web search. There are a few tools you can use for that. And I'd rather not mention this because of I may leave somebody outside, but a simple web search will actually review at least 3 or 4 of them that are very popular.
Awesome. Is it possible to produce an impact map without a tool?
Oh, it is. Actually, I have several clients. As long as you have a big wall,
yeah.
You have a big wall and you put everything in the wall. I'm not a tools person. I prefer to do things face to face in a wall. Now, I understand there are distributed teams and et cetera, et cetera. In those cases, you may still just do it for webcam, pointing and everybody sees what everybody is doing. There's actually a very interesting software for that, which is a Scrum Scale partner. I'm not going to mention the name, so I don't exclude anybody. But you can do without a tool if you have at least a webcam. I have a client in the beginning of the year with a team in Boston and another one in Stockholm, doing that with a webcam pointing to the wall.
Oh, cool.
So you can do it. I prefer not having the tool initially because even very good tools always lack that tactile feeling of moving things on the board, right? But if you are in a distributed team, you may entertain the idea of using a tool.
Got it. Awesome. And one follow-up question to kind of the topic earlier about how to make this the most successful. What can a Scrum Master do to ensure that an impact map is one created and then also successfully used?
Well, as we all know, Scrum Masters are or should be great facilitators, right? So what you should do as a Scrum Master is to prevent people to losing focus, try to solution. An impact map is not for solutioning, as you saw. So as a Scrum Master, if I were to facilitate a session, and unfortunately, most Scrum Masters are not familiar with product ownership tools, which is a shame. And I try to always teach those things to Scrum Masters because all the training out there for Scrum Masters is more about facilitation, it's about Scrum and proper Scrum and etc. But we leave a little bit of product ownership to desire. So if I was a Scrum Master, I would familiarize myself with basics of impact mapping. I would facilitate the session. I would make sure that there is focus. I would make sure there's no solutioning. I would make sure that the impact map objective is being met.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. I also wanted to say we do have about 15 minutes left in the time box, and there's only a couple of questions left. So if you'd like to put some in that Q can address, use the Q&A panel. And then also, yes, I am seeing a couple of comments about getting a copy of the slide. The recording of the webinar and the slide deck will be available on the website within 24 hours.
Yep. And if you guys have questions, feel free to email me. I answer as quickly as I can. Some days I'm just too busy, but usually I will answer. I may not be as quickly as you would like, but I always answer. And you guys have my emails in the slide deck, so feel free to contact me. A lot of people do. You can also come to the coaching sessions, which I have on the screen. We have one coming on Thursday. It's European-based, it's in English, but it's in a very convenient time for both Europe and the US.
Yeah.
And the week after we have the US one, which is not as convenient for people in Europe, but it can be attended by people in Asia. So we try to cover, we have 4 of them a month, except for July, August, and December, we only have 2. But you can come and ask all those questions, and it's not only me, there's other trainers there, so you have a variety of opinions and approaches.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right, one more from Ustav. My organization is diversified in terms of different products. How do I coach them and where do I start?
Oh, that's a bit a longer thing for this webinar. Actually, this is going to be the next webinar in December.
Okay, perfect.
But it's a bit too long. If you want that answer, I would recommend you come to the next Scrum at Scale coaching session or one of them, because I need at least 20 to 30 minutes just to explain that. I'm not refusing to explain. It's just too long for the amount of time that we have right now. So either come to one of the coaching sessions or come to the webinar in December. There'll be several sessions until December. This is a bit too long a topic to be a single answer. I'm sorry, but there is a constraint there on time.
It is a bit of a hefty question, and I'll add a link to the virtual coaching sessions as well in the follow-up email so everyone is able to join. But I am curious then, because it's such a hefty question, if we wanted to tie it back to impact mapping, would you suggest that each product line had their own impact mapping session, or?
I prefer to talk about goals.
Yeah.
and the goals may be met by multiple products or one single product.
Got it.
When you're talking about vision and goals, you may use different products for a goal. You may have actually a suite of products to match a goal. So when you think about goals, you are thinking on a more abstract thing than necessarily the product. Mm-hmm. The product comes after pretty much at the deliverable level. So goals are more abstract and more encompassing than products. You can meet them with a single product or multiple products, but I wouldn't be too worried about the products when you're doing impact map. I'll be worried about goals, outcomes, impacts, actors, what you're trying to solve. Then when you dig into the deliverables, then you may say, okay, this is one product, a suite of products, different products, but don't try to think about product first, because you run the risk of solutioning.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. An additional question. Impact mapping is comparatively easy in a single Scrum team. Can it be used in executive meta Scrums by PO organizations or on a broader scale?
Absolutely. I've done this all the time. Awesome. And to tell you the truth, and everybody's gonna laugh because they know this is pretty much the case if you've been a Scrum Master at least. I would tell you the most difficult thing when you coach executives is to get alignment. It's almost like going to the dentist with no anesthesia. If you are trying to align executives, and impact maps are great for aligning executives, because executives are interested in goals and impacts. They're not interested in the minutia that comes with the deliverables. That's actually why I said deliverables are the least important part. But yes, you can use for multiple teams. I have several clients that use it for groups of teams. I have executives doing that for a transformation backlog, like I showed an example earlier. So you can use it anywhere. I would just say, when you work with executives, getting alignment is very difficult, and the impact map helps a lot, because they tend to go into tangents for some reason, more so than development teams. So impact map help a lot.
Awesome. All right. For product owners and impact mapping, do you have any book recommendations?
I actually do. There is a book, but Goiko Achik, I don't know how to spell it, but I'll have Alisa send on the post email. It's actually a very thin book. I always give away that book to people when I do an impact mapping session. It's very simple, very quick. It's you can read it in probably in about an hour. Oh, wow. And I'll make sure to include the book on the post email.
Yeah, absolutely. We can include that. All right, we have an additional question. Mm-hmm. And I might say this wrong, so I apologize in advance, but did you look at mobiusloop.com outcomes that matter, and is it related to impact mapping?
I didn't. I will. And okay. I'm guessing that probably is, but I haven't looked.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. All right, an additional one. How many people are part of your impact map workshop, or who should be invited to the impact map workshop?
The last two I did. One was a product ownership workshop. There was about 11 or 12 people in the room. Mm-hmm. And I was the facilitator. This was a product focused impact mapping, and the goals were commercial goals, and to meet the company vision. The second one, the most recent one, was a transformation backlog impact mapping, which we had a heat map that was generated by interviewing, I believe, 55 different people. I only put portion of it in the screen, otherwise it would be really hard to read. And from that heat map, we created a transformation impact map. And from there, we eventually got to a transformation backlog. In that particular one, there were only 8 people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It was more executive level. And I was also facilitating the session. I done some with about between 15 and 20 people. Gets a bit noisy, but you also get a lot of good ideas. So it's a bit taxing when you are the facilitator with that many people, but they're very productive sessions. They're very, very productive sessions. And then, of course, there will be another session to clean up the impact map. We first capture everything, and then we do some pruning, and we figure out what has value, what doesn't, and do the conversions or divergence as it is. But I would say ideally, less than 10 people is relatively easy to facilitate. More than 15 people gets a bit rowdy, but is still fun.
Awesome. Perfect. Follow up to that is, do you derive goals from the heat map?
You normally start with the goals.
Got it.
You have to have the goals to create, to figure out who the actors are and the impacts and eventually the deliverables. I don't think it would make much sense to come from the deliverables back to the goal, right? So I wouldn't say derive goals. You decide what your goals are, and the map is to how to accomplish those goals.
Awesome. Got it. All right. An additional one that we had gotten in the chat, what challenges have you seen small companies with either 4 to 5 teams on a much smaller scale? What challenges have you seen them overcome?
As far as impact mapping go, or just the team in general?
I'm assuming impact goal and prioritization.
Well, honestly, it doesn't matter if it's 4 teams or 40 teams. Mm-hmm. The biggest goal, the biggest difficulty, it's usually ordering, which some people call prioritizing. I avoid the word priority because everybody becomes priority 1 really quickly, right? So I prefer ordering, which goes from 1 to whatever. Mm-hmm. The biggest difficulty, it's always ordering. And the impact map helps you a lot with that because you have the goals, and you can have the goals in a certain order as to what outcome those goals are trying to accomplish, what kind of impact. So it's a lot easier to understand what you are trying to accomplish with that before even dealing with the deliverables. And that holds true for 1 team, for 5 teams, for 50 teams. I mean, I had some very large number of teams. And in the end, the product owner organization, it's not actually that large when you compare to the number of teams, and people can actually have very interesting conversations. Now, usually the impact map is done at a higher level than the group of teams is usually at the highest level of product ownership, right? And then what happens is once you have the deliverables, that backlog is going to be decomposed and then sent to groups of teams and then decomposed again and sent to the teams. So the difficulty is always to create the initial set of goals and have those goals in order.
Got it.
And then you figure out how you're going to meet those goals into that order. And orders may change based on market situations, you know, and regulatory things, which is really big if you are in banking or any financial stuff or healthcare. So that's basically it.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. An additional question, can we consider impact mapping as an event before we add to the product backlog on a regular basis? What is the interval to be considered?
I wouldn't consider it an event because even refinement is not an event. Mm-hmm. Events are prescribed and they have a cadence things like refinement don't have a cadence. You know, you can refine every day, you can refine once a week or twice a week. Normally the impact map, it doesn't happen very often, because once you have the goals, it usually takes a little bit of time to accomplish the goals. And I would say probably somewhere around quarterly, maybe even less so, maybe even less than that. But impact maps don't happen every 2 weeks or so. I mean, I never seen a case like that. Unless you are doing something really targeted, you have only one goal, and you're gonna have an outcome, and the deliverables for that impact, for that outcome, they are not a lot. So then you could do with more frequency. But usually the impact maps, they are not done more than at least quarterly or so. That's the majority of the clients I had. But it doesn't mean it cannot be done in a higher frequency, but then you're probably not going to have multiple goals. You're going to have one goal that can be delivered. What meets that goal, the outcome for that goal can be delivered relatively quick. Then you would do it on a higher frequency, but it sure is not an event. It's like refinement is not an event. Those things happen at whatever works best for your organization. They're not prescribed.
Got it. Perfect. All right. Just one more question to take us back to the heat map. When you see a reason to improve based on a scaling heat map, how do you start the impact mapping based off of that?
Can you say it again? I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah. When you see a reason to improve based on a scaling heat map, the Scrum at Scale heat map that you had showed, how do you start the impact mapping process or workshop based off of that?
For instance, in that example that I said, one thing that was there were two things that were very critical in the organization. One was prioritization, AKA ordering. The other one was decision delay. So our goal was to reduce decision delay. Our goal is to proper prioritize. Then we go after the actors. So who are the actors for prioritization? Well, if you're in Scrum at Scale, is the EMS team, right? And the EMS team is made up of product owners, stakeholders, executives, everybody who has an interest into that. So, okay, then those are the actors. What are the impacts we're trying to do? We're trying to achieve better ordering. So what are the deliverables? Well, we may classify things as per business value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with decision delay. We have to reduce decision delay. Who are the people involved? Well, it can be the E18 Scrum at Scale. It can be the Scrum Masters if you're not scaling. It can be whoever is in charge of propagating the questions so it can be answered as quickly as possible. If it's tactical and operational, is on the Scrum Master side. If it's strategic, is on the product owner side. So those would be the actors. And then what are the impacts? Well, we're trying to do whatever to reduce decision delay. For instance, having a scale daily Scrum, which you didn't have before, right? That sort of thing. And then you get to the deliverable, which would be implement the scale daily Scrum and so on. So.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. And it looks like we don't have any additional questions, and we are actually a little past our time box for today's event. So Q, if it's all right with you, I think we'll wrap things up.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much, guys. I'll make sure to include the book on the post webinar material. If you want more details, feel free to come to the Scrum at Scale online sessions. We have one this Thursday, next Thursday, the Thursday after. We usually have them every Thursday, except for December when we only have two. But we have them every month for the US and Europe. Feel free to come, especially the longer questions which I couldn't answer today. Feel free and come, and I'll do a webinar about product ownership at scale. It's actually going to be a panel in December, and you guys are going to be notified, and we're going to have more time to answer questions. We'll do 1 hour, right, Alisa? We decided to do.
Yep, in December it will be 1 hour. Get a couple of more voices in. It'll be exciting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's it for everybody who participated. I thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, you know how to contact me. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.